Now, NDE Radio, a weekly exploration of near-death experiences and similar encounters with the other side. Now, here's your host, Lee Witting.
Welcome to NDE Radio with Lee Witting, whether you're listening on TalkZone, by podcast, through the archives of our ad-free shows on our YouTube channel, or connected through the incredible content of our Facebook page. Our guest today, Aaron Thomas Green, was born in Durham, North Carolina, grew up in a Catholic family, and had an NDE just before his 6th birthday. Afterwards, he was so preoccupied with the memories of the event that a spirit guide told him his NDE should be forgotten for a while so he could get on with the job of growing up on Earth. Aaron agreed and got on with his life, going through school and becoming a licensed professional engineer with Newport News Shipbuilding. He has worked on the development and delivery of aircraft carriers and submarines for the U.S. Navy since 1999. Aaron is married with 3 teenage children and a Labradoodle. Remarkably, it was about 10 years ago when Aaron happened to read an article in Newsweek about Eben Alexander's NDE that his memories in detail were allowed to return. During his childhood NDE, Aaron was able to gain fascinating insights into the pre-life spiritual process that led to his soul becoming who he is, and he was shown many other things as well. Aaron Thomas Green, welcome to NDE Radio.
Well, thanks for having me, Lee.
Oh, it's great to have you here. Aaron, just before your 6th birthday, you were out playing with friends and your older brother when you suddenly found you couldn't breathe. So tell us the amazing story of what you experienced that day.
Right. So I was just playing with some friends in the neighbor's backyard. And, I developed a breathing problem. I couldn't breathe no matter what I did. And as I struggled to breathe, I walked away from my friends and I became more and more upset and, just despondent that I couldn't breathe. And this breathing problem triggered, it triggered a release of my soul. I didn't pass out or faint, but my soul actually left my body. And when that happened, I witnessed, I was outside my body and I witnessed my body fall to the ground. And, immediately I knew something major had happened. And I looked back at my friends and they were still doing what they were doing and completely oblivious to me. And at that time, what had seemed so important to me, just before this happened, it now seemed almost trivial. And almost immediately after leaving my body, my entire life of almost 6 years replayed. It replayed for me in extreme detail. I re-experienced everything that I had experienced during those 6 years of life. The difference is that now, in addition to re-experiencing what I had experienced, I also got to feel the feelings and experience of those around me, how I had affected them. And, being 6 years old, the primary impact I had was on my parents. And so I could experience what they had felt from, raising me. And a couple things stood out. One was my mother's love for me. That really stood out. It seemed simultaneously very important and yet very minor in the grand scheme of things. And somehow that both of those stood out. But it seemed like that love was important, like it really mattered. And then also my father loved me too. But what stood out from him was the frustration of having a baby, the crying, the screaming, changing the diapers, his frustrations and anger associated with that really stood out. When that spontaneous replay of my life was over and I was done looking at it, it seemed like those 6 years was almost nothing, like it was trivial. Like I hadn't really done anything in those 6 years. Like it felt very, very brief. Like it had been a short life. But it was what it was. And, as I floated there next to my body, I noticed a light in the distance, and I knew that this light was important. It looked like a solitary star, but I knew it wasn't a star. It had an importance to it, but I didn't understand what that was, and I couldn't remember. I feel like maybe I could have gone towards that light, but I didn't. I just stayed there next to my body, and I focused my attention away from that light. And I had the question, what am I? And here on Earth, we can't really see ourselves, but there as a spirit, I was able to look at myself, and I was like a round orb of energy, I guess. There was a faint light coming from within myself, and there was more complexity to just a round orb, but I didn't understand it, and I couldn't explain it. But that's what I looked at as I was kind of floating around there in my neighbor's backyard, and the backyard had been a well manicured lawn that was cut like you'd see in suburbia, but here in this what I guess was a spiritual plane of existence parallel to our physical realm, there was still grass and houses, but it looked kind of disheveled. The grass was like unmowed, and there was kind of some weeds and stuff. Anyway, I started to have more questions, and as I would have a question, the spiritual answer would come to me, and it was almost like I was re-experiencing something I had previously experienced, but it was in extreme detail, and it was very clear that this was something I had previously experienced, but the answer to my question was me re-experiencing what I had previously experienced. So anyway, I had the thought, where did I come from? Where did I start? And this spiritual memory came to me, and it's like I re-experienced this event that I had previously experienced. And it started as I was back in what I would call a sea of souls. I was a soul just like I had, like I existed, as I just described, but I was with hundreds or thousands of other souls, and we all existed in this this very, I would call it a sea of light. We were all together. There was light everywhere. It was very bright. We were, immature and naive. We were happy and content. Not like extremely happy, but we were content, and we were safe. And it was like nothing could ever go wrong. Everyone was content. We all knew each other, and we're basically friends. And as we existed like this, periodically a treat would come to us. There would be one treat for every soul, and we enjoyed getting these treats, and they made us happy. I don't understand what they were, but somehow we would periodically get these treats, and it was something that made us happy. Anyway, one time these treats came, and there was one fewer treats than there were souls, and all the souls knew this, and I knew it, and I knew that these souls were just like me, and that they wanted a treat. And so I made the decision that I would forgo the treat so that everyone else around me could have the treat, because they were just like me, and I knew that they wanted the same things that I wanted. And as soon as the last treat came down to the last soul, I was very, very gently and carefully lifted up out of this sea of souls, and a higher level consciousness contacted me mentally and communicated that what I had done was very important, that it was a big deal, that I had sacrificed something I wanted to help those around me, that was very important. And this higher level entity or mind said that it had created me, and that I was loved and important, and that all the other souls were loved and important also, and that I view this as my creator, but I'll just call it God for simplicity's sake. And God said that there was a wonderful existence prepared for me, and that by sacrificing this thing that I wanted for my the friends around me, that indicated that I was ready for I guess further training or education or some sort of, I was ready for something. And I said, well, okay. And God said, there was an experience prepared for me that would give me what I needed so that I could fully appreciate all the happiness that God had in store for me. And I asked, couldn't you just change me and make me however I need to be so that I can enjoy this, what you have for me? And God responded, absolutely. God was capable of changing me and all these other souls to be like that, but that we were created with free will, and that it was extremely important that we have free will, that, we weren't created to be mindless slaves to God or to do exactly what God wanted, but rather we were made to be free and able to make our own decisions. And that was very important. And that, God was, and you could really feel this, but God was, loving and kind and compassionate and forgiving and, wise and extremely intelligent and powerful. Everything you could, all the positive traits you've ever heard about God, that's totally what, I felt relating to him. But essentially we were, created as free will beings, and that in order to enjoy all this stuff that God had in store for us, we needed to freely embrace these kinds of traits, being loving, kind, compassionate, forgiving, nice, all the traits like that we would need to freely accept those through our own decisions to be that kind of a soul. And that in order to appreciate all the happiness God had in store for us, we needed to freely choose those things without coercion or being forced to do so. So I said, oh, okay, I guess that makes sense. So before I was to be sent on this journey, God asked if I wanted to see God's face. And I said, okay, sure. And so my attention was turned away from these souls that I had been with, and, these simple souls, and turned towards a giant sun-like entity. And there was billions and billions of souls all together in this entity. And they were extremely happy. It was very similar to the sea of souls I had been in, except that these souls were more mature and they were much, much happier. And some of these souls kind of like came to the surface to wish me well and say hello and kind of like welcome me into this existence or whatever. And they were extremely happy. And to take their attention off of what they had been doing to focus it on me and communicate with me, they were still extremely happy. But it was actually, it's like it lowered their happiness a little bit to be talking to me, the simple soul. Anyway, they understood what I was about to go through, and they wished me well. And they said that, when I was through with my experience, that I would join them, that I would eventually get through what I had to go through, and I would come back and join them. And so, I said, okay. So God asked me if I was sure that I was willing to go through this experience. God said that it would be very difficult, but it would be very short, so short. And the confidence that God had in this plan that he had made was immense. God was extremely confident that this was a good plan, and that, everything had been done the way it should be, and that this was a good idea. Okay. God had no question about whether or not this was a good idea or something that was worthwhile. So I agreed to it, and God was very pleased that I agreed to it. And I was then, like, very quickly, I was off, like zooming away to whatever this experience is. And I was shown thousands and thousands of different places I could go, different, I guess, planets that I could go to. I could understand the basics of what I needed to understand about each of these planets in like a fraction of a second. There was, I had an immense level of understanding at that point. And I don't know, the detail. I don't remember any of the details of any of these other planets, only that there was a huge number of them. And that from a spiritual perspective, going to one planet is about the same as going to the other. It's a similar process of a physical life. But there was something about Earth that I saw that I really liked, and I was just positive that this was the place for me. And so I said, this is where I want to go. And I was asked, are you sure? Any decision I made, that I was always asked, are you sure? And when I agreed, then that was it. The decision was made. So I agreed that, yes, I was sure I wanted to come to Earth. And at that point, the spiritual memory ended. That memory answered my question, how did I get here? And, I was back to floating next to my body. And I had, another question as I just kind of floated there and meandered about, how did I become Aaron Green? Why was I this person? And so again, a spiritual memory came to be something that I had previously experienced. It replayed for me in extreme detail. So I had been with some guides who were helping plan this life, and the guides, they were helping me pick a body, I guess. And they showed me this person I could become, and it was going to be an extremely angry person. And I don't remember the details, but I think there was something about this person's childhood that was going to be difficult, and that would cause them to be an angry person growing up. And I just completely rejected it. I said, no, I'm not going to do that. And the guides respected that. And so they shifted to what I think was a nearby family. And I was shown some parents that I thought seemed nice. And I was shown that, hey, I could be one of their children. And so being the guides, we started looking at the different bodies that were available, the different people I could become. And after seeing the angry person that I could have become, I was concerned that I could be, that I could grow up to hurt people, that I could be mean or, mistreat people. And so I wanted to be a female because I felt like they were less likely to hurt somebody. And I felt that my parents could have they had the genes there that they could have a redheaded child. And I knew that, redheads were kind of rare, that it wasn't common, and that really appealed to me. I really wanted to be something unusual or unique, and that was available to me. But it was also self-evident that, if I became a redheaded girl, that there was something about the personality I would have as this girl where, I would be kind of socially awkward. Something about it wasn't quite right. And I would never have a husband. And that was a problem for me. I wanted to get married and have a spouse, but if I had chosen one of these redheaded girls, something about it didn't work out, and it just wasn't possible. So I took a look at the redheaded boys that this couple could have. And somehow there was even fewer options for redheaded boys. And it just didn't work out at all. It wasn't the right fit. So I took a look at, okay, well, what about the brown-haired boys? And there was oodles and oodles of brown-haired boys that this couple could have. I guess that's just the dominant genes that they had. Yeah. And I started taking a look at the different options, and something about it seemed like it fit better than some of the other options. And so I thought, well, if I'm gonna do this, I want to be like, the best looking guy on the planet. I want to be extremely good looking. That seemed like a better life for me. But while my parents definitely had those genes available to them, that was certainly an option. The guides basically pointed out that I didn't have the self-control if I was an extremely good looking person. I didn't have the restraint to avoid certain temptations that would be available to me, and that I would be too promiscuous. I would be with too many women, essentially. And that there was a spiritual downside to that was obvious there, in that, while picking the body, it was obvious that being too promiscuous was not a good thing. So I basically lowered the attractiveness down to a level that I considered to be attractive, but not, nothing extraordinary, just like a little bit attractive. Now I know, at 47, maybe I'm not that good looking, but 30 years ago, I was a little better looking, and my looks then kind of matched, they matched what I had picked, what I remember picking. And then I started looking at intelligence, what kind of intelligence will I have with this new body? And I wanted to be the smartest guy on the planet. I wanted to be ridiculously intelligent, like a Aristotle or Albert Einstein, just a genius. And my parents had those genes. That was something I could pick. But I was shown by the guides that, well, if you pick this, you're going to develop into a very arrogant, kind of a loner person. You're going to resent people that aren't as smart as you, and you're going to be atheist. And that was not appealing to me at all. And I realized that, hey, that would be a big problem for me to be that intelligent. So like I'd done with looks, I lowered the intelligence down to something that I considered to be intelligent, but, nothing extraordinary, nothing remarkable. And when I found what I thought would be the right intelligence, I said, okay, this looks good. And, I picked the body that I thought worked well for me and would be a good fit. And I was shown that the genes I had picked, they would, this wasn't something that was planned, but it was like a side effect that an unintended part of the genes I had picked was that I would have really bad acne as a teenager. And from about 14 to 16, somewhere in there, I did have really horrible acne. But as a soul, I saw that even though this would be difficult, 2 years of horrible acne and people being kind of mean to me about it, that it would actually, help me in my development. And from this perspective as a soul, 2 years seemed like it was almost nothing. It seemed so trivial. It's kind of hard to believe, but that's how I viewed it as a soul. Like 2 years is nothing. And it would help me on my, help me in my development. So it seemed like, okay, it'll help me, and it's only 2 years. I was willing to accept that. And my guide showed me that there was a couple things planned for my life. One was that my nose would be broken as a teenager. I was shown that I would dislocate, that I would hurt one shoulder. And then I was shown that I would break my other shoulder. And I took a closer look at that, and I was shown that, the technology was available to repair the shoulder and make it better. And it's kind of funny, but from that perspective, the human technology seemed so primitive. It seemed like, like humans were living in the dark ages almost, that they had primitive technology, but the primitive technology was good enough to fix my shoulder. So that was okay. I was willing to go along with that. And then I was also shown that I could have a club foot. Somehow the genes were there for me to have a club foot, but that would not be helpful to my development. It would just make my life a little bit more difficult. And it wouldn't help like my friends or family. It wouldn't help anybody, and it would make my life more difficult. So I passed on that. And, I was shown that I would be circumcised, and I needed to agree to that. And that seemed like something that was unnecessary and not really a good thing, but also it seemed kind of minor. It didn't seem like a big deal as a soul. And so I agreed to that. And, we took a closer look at my family. I had a very good understanding of who my parents were, what they were like, what they would be like as parents. I knew that I would have an older brother, and I knew what our relationship would be like. And I had a good understanding of the family dynamic. In short, I knew what I was getting myself into. Then I looked at the names that my parents might pick for me. And one of the names they were considering, Aaron, it really worked. The name Aaron Thomas Green had a couple of hidden references inside that name related to me and my life that I really liked. Like it really appealed to me. And I was able to exert, because this was the name that I was going to have, I was able to exert a little bit of my will over my parents and push them in the direction to pick that name. And so I did. And I pushed them to pick that name, and they did. It was something they were already considering, so it wasn't difficult at all. So anyway, when all this stuff was picked, my guides and I, we took another look at the entirety of my life, what it was going to look like. And they again asked me, are you sure you're willing to do this? And, I looked at the basic outline for my life and the body and everything. And I agreed, yes, I'm willing to do that. And then that memory ended, and I was back to floating there next to my body as a soul. And I started thinking, well, I know everyone leaves this earthly life behind sometime. What happens to people after they die? What happens there? And I was shown a couple different ways that different people might exist after they die. So the first place I saw was a really horrible place. It was a whole lot of souls that were hideous and ugly. They had a really ugly body, and they had claws instead of arms, and they were just fighting with each other constantly. That they wanted to kill each other, and as much as no matter how much they fought each other, they couldn't kill each other. They just would wound each other horribly, and they would suffer from those wounds, but they would never die. They just kept fighting forever. And, as I was watching these horribly miserable souls fight with each other, one of them decided to stop fighting. It made the choice that it was going to stop fighting with these other souls. And as soon as that soul stopped fighting, there was some beings of light or angels, something like that had been above this horrible scene, and they were observing all these souls fighting. And as soon as this soul decided to stop fighting, this being of light or angel swooped down and lifted this soul out of this horrible battle. And I was told that when this soul decided to stop fighting, it no longer belonged in this battle, in this group, and that they had a way for this soul to move forward, to progress, that soul and all the other souls, that none of them were going to be stuck in this horrible situation forever. And then I was shown in another plane of existence where souls were just kind of standing around in darkness, and they were kind of like confused, and they didn't understand where they were or what was going on. And they were unhappy, but they weren't miserable. And there was some higher level souls, I guess, some happier souls that were there trying to help them. And these happier souls, they had a way that they could help these unhappy souls, and they were trying to help them. But all these unhappy souls in the darkness, they were mistrustful. They didn't really they had a difficult time believing that someone was there to help them. That was kind of like a foreign concept to them. They were not of the mindset to help anybody else. And so for them to accept that someone was there to help them was very difficult. But eventually I saw one of these souls agree that it was going to go with these higher level souls, and that they were going to help it, and that there was a way for that unhappy soul to progress and become better, and that none of these souls were going to be stuck there forever. And then I saw another place where these souls lived. They were kind of unhappy, and they lived in a place that was kind of like Earth with buildings and roads. And, they were unhappy, but not miserable at all. But, I was also told that they wouldn't be there forever, that they could progress. And then I was shown a similar situation where it was kind of like Earth, with buildings and streets. And the souls in this place were happy. They were very happy, living this existence kind of like Earth. And then I was shown a city of light where the souls were extremely happy. It was kind of like the buildings and the people there and the roads, everything was made of light, and everything was translucent. It was absolutely beautiful. And the souls there were very, very happy. And then I witnessed even a higher level plane where the souls were kind of like flying around, and they were so happy that they had trouble containing it. It was almost like they were borderline overloaded with happiness. They were almost too happy. And then of course, earlier I'd seen souls that were with God after they had been through life or whatever. And those souls were extremely, extremely happy. But after I saw these different locations that these different souls existed at, it occurred to me, like I remembered that, when I was done with this life, that I could go home. That's how I thought of it. And for me, home meant this city of light. Like I for some reason, that's where I expected that I would be after this life was over. And I remember that, I had friends that I would be able to see, and I was so happy that, I could go be with my friends, be in this happy place. And it was almost like as soon as I had that realization, an angel or a being of light or some kind of high level soul came to me very quickly and said, with telepathy, you are not to leave your body. It was as if I had done something wrong, like I had almost like I had broken a rule. I had done something I shouldn't have done. I guess my breathing problem should not have triggered my soul to release from my body. But anyway, almost as soon as that happened, it was like, bam, I was back inside my body, and I stood up. And at that point, my brother had come over to see why I was just laying there on the ground. And as soon as I stood up, he turned around and went back to play with the friends. And I walked back home. I tried to explain what had happened to my mother, but at that age, I had a number of speech impediments. There was I had a lot of difficulty making a lot of words. I spent years in speech therapy to get better at that, but I just could not explain what had happened to her at all. She just couldn't understand it. I just wasn't able to explain it. So I gave up trying to explain it to her. But I would think about this experience daily for months and months, trying to understand what had happened to me. And after maybe 6 months, something like that, I was contacted by this same spirit guide who would help me pick this life. Like I didn't see anybody or see anything, but I could tell that I was being contacted by the same guide. And the guide said to me essentially, we're going to need to hide these memories that you have. They're interfering with your life. It's causing you problems, and we're going to need to hide them. But they needed my permission in order to hide them. They couldn't just force that on me. And I asked, why would you need to hide this? And one of the things they told me was that since I had this knowledge, that I could never have faith. Like somehow the knowledge of what I had been through would prevent me from having faith. There's something about accepting the existence of God without having some kind of proof. There's something important about that I didn't understand. I asked them to explain why faith would be so important, and they tried to explain it to me, but I just couldn't comprehend what they were trying to explain to me. But they told me, look, all you need to know is faith is important. And so I agreed, and they basically hid my memories from me. And I didn't think about what had happened to me at all after that. I went through life. In 7th grade, I got in a fight with another kid, and he broke my nose. I had a black eye for weeks, and I had to get surgery to get the nose fixed. And it was a difficult experience. In 7th grade, having something like that happen, the entire school knew what happened. It was a difficult experience, but I had no memory that I had agreed to that experience. And then when I was 19, I dislocated my shoulder. No memory that I had agreed to that. And then when I was about 35 or 36, I broke and dislocated my other shoulder. And that was a much more serious injury. I had to get surgery to get that shoulder fixed. And that was difficult to go through, but I had no knowledge that I had agreed to any of that. And then about 10 years ago, I was reading an article in Newsweek magazine. A guy named Dr. Eben Alexander. He was a neurosurgeon who had a near-death experience. And this article in this magazine was describing his experience and what he had seen. And since he was a neurosurgeon, while he was in a coma, he was hooked up to a lot of brain monitoring equipment. And essentially the brain monitoring equipment, it verified that, he had no brain activity. But while, he had no brain activity in his body, his soul was going through all this different stuff, this really intense experience. Anyway, there was something about his experience. It clicked with me, and I accepted his experience. What he was saying is true. I thought to myself, wow, this is really neat. I guess it's all true. I guess, wow, God's really real, and that's all real. And when I accepted, his story, when I had, I guess, a deepening of faith, when that happened, something was triggered, something happened, and my memories came back to me. The memory of what had happened when I was a child came back to me, and that was a pretty amazing experience. It was a wonderful feeling to remember, wow, I had that experience as a kid, and I would think about that experience daily. Again, just like I did when I was a kid, I was thinking about this all the time, and trying to come to terms and understand all this stuff that I now remembered. And then, fast forward 10 years later, here I am talking to you, Lee.
And it's an amazing story. There was one thing I wanted to ask you about. You had said in a previous conversation, I think you told me that you were present at your conception when the egg and the sperm joined together. Did you have a feeling that you could have entered the body at that time, or is the soul free to go into the body at any time up till birth?
Right. Yeah. I think that God gives us as much freedom as possible. And I think the soul, if I understand correctly, I think the soul is free to enter the body anytime between conception and birth. And I don't think I fully merged with this body until right before I was born. I think, I existed kind of like as a free soul, kind of partially merged with this body, yet not confined to the body before birth. And I think it was only like right before birth that I fully merged and stayed in this body without leaving.
I think that comports with other NDEers I've talked to who've had pre-birth experiences. And it's actually a factor that should be taken into consideration when people talk about, abortion of a fetus that's not making it, for instance.
Sure.
The soul is not necessarily trapped in that fetus.
Right.
It's free to come and go and perhaps even choose another set of parents and be born
Right.
there.
Right.
Yeah. We talked about when you were next to your body, I think you said it was like a parallel dimension and that the grass was in 2 dimensions. Elaborate a little on that. Tell us how you saw it.
Okay. So I was in a realm that looked very similar to the earth plane, but there were some noticeable differences. Like some of the buildings were there, like the building on earth was there in this realm as well, but the fence between the 2 houses were not. And there was grass kind of like, there had been on earth, but the grass was different. It was kind of disheveled. It was overgrown. It didn't seem like it had been tended to. They looked alike, but somehow they were different. And it definitely wasn't the same. I'm not sure if I'm the best person to describe this, but the best I could say was it's like there's a parallel spiritual dimension that's next to this physical plane of existence that we're on right now. And that, when I left my body, I wasn't in this physical plane exactly. I was more like on this parallel spiritual plane, but I could look into the physical plane without any problem.
Right. So there's it's like a one-way view.
Right.
From the spiritual, you can look into the physical, but it doesn't work the other way.
Yeah.
Part.
That's totally what it seemed like.
The levels of heaven, I guess we'll call them, even though the first one was pretty ugly, where everyone was fighting. I think you said that souls seem to group together according to their similar frequencies.
Right.
So that if you got angry souls, they're in there mixing it up with one another. Talk a little about that. And as somebody matures in their frequency, do they then jump to the next level, maybe to the darkness where they're uncomfortable but not fighting?
Yeah, that's a good question. A couple of things about that I wanted to mention. One is, here on earth, the way we look, it doesn't really have any relationship to what kind of person we are on the inside. Mm-hmm. But in all these different spiritual realms that I looked at, the way the people looked or the way the souls looked was directly related to what kind of person or what kind of soul they were. So a angry, murderous person would have a really ugly soul, and a loving, kind person would have a beautiful soul, and anything in between. There's like a frequency to all these different souls. Like the higher level of the frequency, the happier the soul is. Like murderous, hateful thoughts are kind of like a low vibration, whereas loving, kind, compassionate thoughts are a higher vibration. And, we end up, whatever our vibration level is, we end up with others who are kind of just like us. And it's not like we're being forced into that group. It's just kind of like where we naturally fit in. And that's where we're most comfortable, even if, it's a miserable state. Like at one point I witnessed a soul was at a certain level, and they wanted to communicate with a lower level soul, and that was possible, but they would have to lower their vibration essentially to match that lower level vibration. And that was relatively easy, but when they did that, they lost some happiness and some intelligence in order to match the lower vibration.
So you could move downward on the scale of frequencies too. You could move from a happy place to an unhappy place.
Yeah, my understanding is it was real easy to move downward in vibration. Like that was no problem at all. But to move upwards in vibration, if a soul tried to do that, they would become extremely irritated. And the further from their own natural vibration that they got, the more uncomfortable they would be. And that it just, it'd be so uncomfortable that they would flee and go back to their normal vibration or their natural vibration according to their own level.
But they could mature their vibration to a higher frequency.
Right. Yeah. God had a way for all these souls at all these different levels that if they wanted to, and a lot of them were encouraged to, that God had a way that they could move to a higher vibration.
In choosing to be Aaron, did you get a choice as to what vibration you'd be starting at? In other words, can you start at a more loving place in life than others?
Well, I think we have some bearing on the parents that we get and the life we're going to choose. I certainly did.
Yes.
And, that affects how we're going to live our life. But there's kind of a twist to that. A soul that starts out in, say, a family that's kind of dysfunctional and people aren't as nice, that soul, if they, let's say, do a very small act of kindness, that small act of kindness has a much greater weight to it than a soul that has grown up in a very loving, kind family. And so there's kind of like a natural balance, because God understands everything that we face in life. And so that a person with a more difficult life, they're not going to be, not as much as expected of them. Whereas a person who was raised in a loving family, they would have greater expectation about how they're going to act in life. And so it kind of balances out in a way. And it's not quite as unfair as it might seem, because you think, a person growing up in a loving family is going to have a huge advantage over a person growing up in a more dysfunctional family. But my understanding is it's not quite that simple.
You foresaw yourself as going into I guess it was the translucent city, the happy, that would be your destination when you die. But the sea of souls in God's face were expecting you at some time to join them. So that means you have to raise your frequency from the translucent city to the face of God.
Yeah, that's kind of what it seems like. I don't know for sure, but yeah, I think what you're saying fits pretty well.
Wow. So we're maturing even after we pass from the physical world to the spiritual world. We're not all set necessarily.
Yeah, I feel like I had education before becoming Aaron Green. I'm not exactly sure what that looked like, but I don't feel like this is my first education. And likewise, I think there'll be more education or learning for me after I leave this body. But again, I don't really know exactly what that would look like.
So what's your take on free will? Do you think we continue to have free will in heaven?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think, our free will is critical. And the further up we can go, the further into heaven, the closer to God that we can get, it's directly related to our free will, that we freely embrace the same kind of characteristics that God has, that we freely become loving, kind, compassionate, forgiving, nice souls that are trustworthy and honest, that by embracing all those characteristics of our own choice, of our own decision, that we're able to then naturally fit in with higher levels of God.
You talked about basically two oceans. There was an ocean of souls that were getting ready to go through the process of living. And then there was the sea of souls, or the ocean of souls, that makes up the face of God. Right. How did the two compare?
So the first sea of souls I was with, everyone was immature, undeveloped, unexperienced. I kind of view it as like baby souls, whereas the souls that were part of, with God and God's face, they were mature souls who had been through the, this education that we all have to go through, and that they had gotten to where they needed to be, and that they were sufficiently loving and they freely chose godly characteristics so that they fit in with God. And also they were much, much happier. There's no comparison really in the happiness levels. So that's kind of the difference. It was kind of like the same thing, except one group was immature and undeveloped, and the other group was completely mature and completely developed and much, much happier.
The different levels of heaven, do you get an idea of what the landscape was like? For instance, where the ugly fights were going on, and
sure.
Of course the complete dark, I guess, was just complete dark. But what were the towns like that you saw as well?
Yeah, so at the lowest level, what I saw was like a rocky plain. There was a dark sky, and the only thing in the sky was a couple of angels who were monitoring the situation. Just dark and rocky, I guess is how I'd describe one place. And the other place, everything was just dark. You couldn't really see anything. It didn't look like anything was there that I could see, other than the unhappy souls standing around. And another level, it looked like Earth, but with ugly buildings and kind of like dirt roads. So those were kind of the lower levels. At the higher levels, there's another place that looked just like Earth, except it definitely was not Earth. And they had buildings that were very nice and roads. And I remember looking at a lamppost, and it was almost like a recreation of a earthly town or city, only much more beautiful. And then this other place was like a city made of light, with translucent buildings and streets that they looked like they were made of a gold light to me, and you could kind of see through them, and yet at the same time you could see them. It was absolutely beautiful, and people were very happy. But then at even higher levels, it seemed like the souls progressed beyond the notion of these physical objects that we're used to on Earth, like physical buildings and physical roads. And as they got to higher and higher levels, the only thing that mattered to them was God and the souls around them, and that's what gave them happiness, and they didn't have any need anymore for like a physical building or anything like that.
You actually gave me a wonderful image when you yesterday when you said every near-death experience is another pixel in the picture. But in the face of God, which is sort of like that too, even though we're merged together, it's not like a drop in the ocean that loses its individuality. We maintain our own. You stay Aaron, I stay Lee, even in the face of God. Yeah,
that's what I saw, was that they got the best of both worlds. They were both simultaneously fully merged with God, and yet they maintained their own individuality and characteristics. That what it looked like to me was, they got their cake and they got to eat it too. They could both enjoy all the benefits of being a unique personality and all the benefits of being fully merged with God and even like merged with each other.
Wow, that's great. I love that. My thoughts briefly on the argument that you needed to develop faith. It's funny because I know NDEers who've said, I don't have faith anymore. I don't need it because I know for sure that God exists. But maybe as a 6-year-old, it's a good thing to learn to believe without having seen necessarily.
Yeah. And what I said, like, I think that was specific to me. Like, my guides were talking to me about, my faith and my journey. And, I asked them, I said, it's when they wanted to hide this experience, I said, well, don't you want people to know this stuff? And they said, yes, absolutely. But, as I took their comments, they were talking about me, and for me and my development as a 6-year-old who had seen all this stuff, it kind of prevented me to develop faith.
Yeah. Well, there are many NDEs. We talked about this a little yesterday too. I said something about, well, where did the Bible come from if it weren't people that had visions and dreams and NDEs and a whole set of spiritually transformative experiences?
Yeah.
Now, it took you quite a long time to remember and then start talking about your NDE, and it did for me as well. But what suggestions or advice would you give to people who've had NDEs who might be listening?
Well, for me personally, I found it helpful to read about other people's NDEs and hear about other similar experiences. And it really helped me understand some parts of my experience better. For example, I was only 6 when I had that life review. And so my life review, I think, was kind of short and not as, I couldn't gain as much information from it. But by hearing other people describe their life review, it really helped me understand mine better. And then there's kind of like a near-death experience community that I think it's helpful to talk to some people that have had a similar experience, because it can be difficult to try to tell friends and family or anyone about these experiences because they're not used to hearing them, and they might not be ready to hear what you have to say, and that can be difficult to try to share these experiences with people who have never heard them before or aren't ready to hear them now. But it's helpful to hear other people who are in the same boat, to hear what they've been through and what their experience is like.
Yeah. Well, Aaron, we're about out of time. I would just want to thank you so much for sharing your childhood's profound near-death experience with us today.
Yeah, thank you, Lee. I appreciate the opportunity to share, and I appreciate what you're doing with this show.
Oh, well, thanks. Tell folks how they can find your Facebook page.
Okay. So, if anybody wanted to contact me, I'm easy to find on Facebook, Aaron Thomas Green, Chesapeake, Virginia. I'm easy to find. Also, you could email me at aaronthomasgreen@yahoo.com. If anybody wanted to ask me any questions or say anything, feel free. I'll do my best to respond if I can.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. I'm sure people will leave comments on our YouTube channel too.
Okay.
That you can check in on if they are asking for a reply. Well, thanks again, Aaron.
Yeah, thank you.
If listeners would like to hear this show again or any of our more than 490 archived ad-free NDE interviews, go to TalkZone's NDE Radio site and hit the Past Shows button, or go to our YouTube channel, NDE Radio with Lee Witting, where you can subscribe to and comment on the complete NDE radio library. And be sure to check out our NDE Radio Facebook page. Search NDE Radio with Lee Witting on your Facebook app. And listen again next Monday, 11 a.m. Eastern at TalkZone for more NDE Radio. I'm your host, Lee Witting, saying thanks for listening.